Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to my channel, Pop Quiz MC, and to all my subscribers. This is the famous Darlene Klassen, who I met years ago, I guess in 92. I met you in 92,
Oh,
and you were teaching math at Goddard High.
yes, I was.
And then you went to teach at Eastern at the college campus out here south of town, right?
Right.
So I'm so excited to have you. Would you call yourself a math teacher? Is that the way you describe yourself?
A math teacher, yes. Yes.
All right.
Next special, just a math teacher. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty special, in my opinion.
Well,
I I like the title teacher.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, why don't you tell me about a technique or a method that you definitely would recommend to any teacher?
Okay. Well, and I did this a lot with new people that would be across the hall from me. I I just stuck my nose in their business and said, the very first day you should look really professional. And I always wore a jacket and a dress or a skirt. And we had to stand in the hall as classes were changed. And so when I was out in the hall, I tried to look very professional. When I came into the classroom to start class, I would take my jacket off. But I told the young man across the hall, who is now the principal at that school, I said, wear a jacket and wear a tie the very first day. And then I said, you can lose the jacket, you can lose the tie a little bit at a time, but establish yourself that that's your classroom and you are in charge. And I said, you can always go down, but you can never come back up. So I thought it was very important to look very professional when you started and
Yeah.
have a seating chart ready. The kids didn't get to sit where they wanted. I had a seating chart, and also that way I could figure out, well, who needs to be near the front, who can't hear, who can't see. Um, so I could make adjustments, but I was in control of that. Even like that, I switched it around periodically, and then you found where some kids just needed to be certain spots.
Right. Right.
So I started that way.
And you had the challenge of trying to write problems on the board with your back to the kids,
That's right.
and eventually you went to what? A kind of projector, right?
I went when I got to the college. They had more professional equipment for me, and I guess that's changed at the high school too. But I was able to use what we called a document camera. So I could write on the document camera with a piece of paper and a pencil and face my classroom. That way we could talk about what we were doing, and I could put my examples on the document camera and they could see it on the board behind me. And as I did my work, I was talking to them, looking at them, and they could see what I was doing. And then I had this piece of paper, and we would go through a problem, and I would set it up. This is how this particular kind of thing works. Maybe we were working on distributive property and some algebra. And then I'd say, okay, why doesn't everybody do this problem? And I'd put it up and give them some time to do it. Then I'd say, okay, let's see, what kind of answers did we get? And I would know the kind of wrong things we would get.
Right.
So they would call out their answers, and two or three would have this, and two or three would have that. And I said, and how many answers could we get on this problem? Well, one. So we had to figure out, well, what was wrong? Well, it was usually distributing around parentheses and negative signs. And so then we'd go through and find out, well, I got that. He got that. Why are we wrong? So that was kind of a neat way to do that. And I kept all my papers. I prepared for the year or the semester, depending. And I would have all my work. So day one, I could walk in and teach the whole class. And I would have these examples in my notes. Then I would take my papers down to the library and photocopy them. And I had a notebook down there at the tutor center that students could come and see what we'd done if they had missed class. But I told the librarian, I said, they can't photocopy these. They have to handwrite them. Otherwise, they're just going to put them in their notebook and they're not going to process it because they won't have had to write it down.
Right, right.
And I did that at the high school too, but they came in to me if they missed and would copy my notes. Well, in retrospect, it would have been better if I could also have done that with the library at the high school.
Yeah.
Because maybe I'm not available or their times aren't my times, and they could go to the library and do it. So I found that was a real valuable tool for students who missed. I had a little ninth grader one day. I think he got sick, and when he came back, he felt real behind because it was an honors algebra class. He said, I don't care if they have to bring me in on a stretcher. I am never missing again. And it just mattered because they needed to hear me say what I was showing examples for, not just copy what I'd done.
Right.
I did a couple of kids say, I could hear you talking while I copied these. But I needed to have me say it while I was doing it.
Right, right. That's a wonderful idea too. I think this idea of having them, I'm sorry about my phone. It does this, and there's not much I can do to stop it.
I
I
don't have a problem.
Okay. So, well, the thing is, usually when I videotape, I make it to where the phone can't ring. But this morning has been amazing.
Oh,
So I didn't have time to set that up. You had told me a great story about a kid being disrespectful.
yes.
And I just finished an episode on how to correct kids. And I thought that would be a great story to tell here.
Okay. Do you want me to say what this child said?
Yes, because it's an adult channel. I always say that it's for grown-ups. It's
Oh,
not. This is for teachers. It's not for children.
yeah. Well, this was an introductory low level math class at the high school. And it was a young man who was just, he didn't want to be there. And I believe it was pretty early in the semester. And whatever I was doing, he was looking down. Everybody else was looking at me, and he called me a bitch. And everybody looked at me, at him, but he didn't know that I knew because he was looking down. So I had to think, what am I going to do? I can't let it pass, and I don't want to escalate it. So let me think. And it was time to work. So they're working on some things at their desk, and I'm just cruising the room. And he was sitting on the far side. When I got there, I just leaned over very quietly and I said, don't ever call me a bitch again. And he popped his head up and he looked at me. And then I just went on and we became kind of friends. And he was kind of a gangy type of kid who was just belligerent. And it seemed to be the best way to solve the problem because I had to do something.
Yeah.
And he probably appreciated what I did.
Yeah.
And it never was a problem again.
Wow, that is wonderful. Yeah. Um, I think that's one of the things I talked about when I was talking about correction. You don't necessarily always know the best way. When something comes up, it's unexpected.
Yes.
So you have to be calm. You have to stay calm and figure out a way to deal with it. So I just really appreciate that story because that's how it happens. That's how disrespect happens suddenly and unexpectedly.
uh, say some vulgar things.
Yeah.
And so I said, wait in the hall. And I filled out a referral for the office and I handed it to him and I said, take this to the office. And he said, oh, you wrote that? I said, you said it. I wrote it. We won't go into what it was, but
That's fine.
I just said this is what he said. And he couldn't believe I wrote it down.
Right. Right. That, yeah, I think they're always shocked when you do that because I have in the past had to do that and I put what was actually said and they don't think about how it's going to feel to hand that piece of paper with
Oh,
those words
no.
to an administrator or to a disciplinarian. They don't know until they have to do it.
Right. Does that light bother you? I can turn it out.
No, it doesn't bother me if it doesn't bother you.
No, no.
So I have the luck. See, now when I met you at Goddard, I was immediately impressed that I thought I want to work where this woman works.
Thank you.
You came across as one of those teachers that's like the teacher. Every school has a teacher that's the teacher.
I never thought of me it that way.
But a friend of ours, Jerry, you started out teaching with Jerry, and
Yes,
she said that when you first started, you didn't think you wanted to stay in teaching. Is that right?
that is right. I cried every night when I went home. My dad would not let me quit. It was middle school and it was really, really hard. I was young. I was probably 22. And that it was kind of a tough school. And my dad wouldn't let me quit.
Yeah.
And then I asked for a transfer at the end of the year. And Mr. Witt was the principal at that time, and he had been my principal.
Oh, okay.
And so I got transferred over to Goddard the next year. So I was only at the middle school 1 year, but it was really, really hard for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
But
kind
what now?
they're mean. I thought they're not people yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Way not people. So, so that's encouraging, I think, because at different times in my career, maybe the first 15 years, I thought about quitting.
50. Wow.
Yeah. But I have a darker vision of the world, I think, than you do. So, you had some other stories about kids that you thought you might like to share.
Well, and it's funny because they're about tardies, and mostly I didn't have trouble in the classroom. A little bit. It just depended. But mostly they said I had the look, and if I used the look, they knew it was time. And so I didn't have a lot of discipline, but we had different tardy policies at Goddard that just changed through the years. And there were a couple that stuck out in my mind. I had a 7 o'clock pre calculus class,
Wow.
and we counted tardies then too. And so 7 o'clock bell rang, and this girl came dashing down the hall, and I let her in. And she sat down and she raised her hand and she said, could I go to the bathroom? I said, you just got here. She said, I know, but I got up late and I haven't been to the bathroom yet. I said, that's the first thing you do. She said, I know, but maybe she hadn't been late. She just made it in. That's what,
Oh, okay.
just made it in. And then she asked to go to the bathroom. And so I did let her go.
Fair enough.
And she was a good kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I recall, she wasn't late, but she did need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And good.
Yeah. That's always a judgment call too, right? When a kid asks to go.
Well, it's a good kid, and the fact that, yeah, she wasn't late, but she sat down and immediately the hand went up, and it was like panic. And so, and my other story, we had a policy. I don't particularly like this policy. If the kids were in the hall, we closed the door, and the administrators were walking around, and anybody was still in the hall, they threw them into the closest classroom.
Oh.
So the problem I have is that they missed their class, but they had to sit in my class, and it was a trig class. So this kid comes in and sits down, and he's real quiet, and we're doing trig, and we are into the subject matter far enough that they're popping off the answers, and it's really a good session.
Yeah.
And when the bell rings, he can go.
Right.
And shortly thereafter, he came back with his friend, and he said, "Look at her board." I think he didn't even know we taught math at Goddard. So impressed with what we were doing. Had no clue, but the class was really good. And whatever we were doing at that time, we had progressed to where they could pop off answers. And so it was real interesting. It was probably good for him, but I was disappointed that we had that policy because they missed their own class.
Right.
You know,
And
I did
it
about that.
it doesn't seem like a rational thing because you wouldn't know their name
No, no.
and they wouldn't know you. It seems like it's asking for trouble.
Uh-huh. And he was fine. And he was into like a senior class, and he was probably a freshman who didn't know that math exists. He was just like stunned what we were doing. So that was kind of good for him. But I thought, yeah, but now he's behind in his class. So that's not good.
Yeah. A tardy becomes an absence in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where that policy wouldn't last. There's
Uh-huh.
just too complicated.
Had lots of different policies. Now, I know that I have a friend at the other high school, and right now, if the student is late, they send them to in school suspension for the day, but the teacher doesn't know they're gone. So they count them absent, but they're not absent, they're in school suspension. And so then they're missing everything.
That's draconian. That's not good.
No, no, it's got to be a better way.
Yeah, yeah. So if one of the things you once said to me that I thought was really interesting, you said that in math class, sometimes when you gave them time to start work on their homework, you told them to start at the bottom.
That's right.
Now,
Start with,
yeah, explain that one.
well, um, and I'm thinking mostly of I had honors algebra one, so they were freshmen. And I always tried to assign enough that I knew they had other classes too.
Right.
And so give them 10 or 12 problems, but not tons. They should be able to do their work, well, within an hour for sure or less. And I told them, I said, if you start with number 10 or number 12, whatever the last problem was, I said, obviously it's the hardest. And I'm here
Right.
and I can help you. And when you go home, if you're not done, they'll be so easy you won't believe it. So I did tell them they couldn't skip around. You either go 1 through 10 or 10 through 1, but I have to grade these, so I don't want to hunt for them. So they could choose how they wanted to do it. And a few of them did that.
Wow.
They liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a different way to think about approaching a problem. Um, to think about the practicality of being able to ask the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, that's how they, at least when, I only taught math for a year, just 1 year, like you with junior high, just one.
Oh,
But um, that was, all of the textbooks I had, because I had three different preps, all of the textbooks I had, the problems were arranged from easiest to hardest in a very stepwise fashion, a very logical fashion.
Yes.
And the answers to, I think the answers in the back were to the evens,
Odds.
okay, the odds. And then the others, they had to figure it out. So they could get the answers, maybe.
Right.
um, but yeah, I never thought of that. And when you mentioned it, I thought that's really interesting because that is a smart strategy. It's actually less about math and more about understanding the challenge of what you're facing, really understanding, okay, I know that this last problem is going to be the hardest.
Right.
And kids might not understand that. The teacher certainly does, but the kids don't.
Right. And sometimes I would tell them, if you're not sure, try the odd that goes with the even because they paralleled.
Right.
So
Right.
you can get the odd one and you get it right, then probably you're doing the even one right.
Yeah. Smart. So, so when you were working with kids, one of the things that I liked about math, especially like algebra, we would start in on the problems and the kids would be totally mystified. They didn't know for nada. They were like, no, no, this is too confusing. And then at some point in the class, either later in a later class or in that class, they would suddenly get it
Yes.
and they'd have this look on their face like, ah. Did you find that? Did you have?
Yes. 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 With clicked. Or there'd be one person that wouldn't get stuff. And often it was a real smart student that had been absent. And everybody else is getting this little concept except that person, and they're all trying to help me. Let me say, I'd say, John, can you help explain this a different way? And sometimes that would work.
Oh, wow. You used other students to
Uh-huh.
demonstrate.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is so good.
They'd say, well, it's because to the kid who's not understanding. And I'd say, well, explain it to him your way. Sometimes that would help.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Do you know that the first assignment I ever had as a teacher was in first grade?
Oh,
My teacher in first grade said, you teach this little girl to read.
oh,
Because I already knew how to read. And so we sat together and I taught her how to read. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I just accepted that the teacher said,
uh,
teach her how to read. And I did. I didn't realize that my teacher was like, oh, you're a teacher.
ew.
Yeah. Uh, did you find that? Did you find kids in the room where you said, oh, this kid's a natural. This kid can,
Yeah. And sometimes I would let them pair to do homework.
yeah,
And mostly that worked where they actually did work and one would help the other. And I found that as you know, when you're teaching, you learn again. And
yeah,
the students who were explaining were learning again.
yeah, yeah. So they got even stronger
Uh,
through that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was the most, other than the junior high class, what was the most difficult class to teach for you?
Oh, probably. Well, they threw me in a calculus class, and I wasn't seasoned enough. And I went down to the counselor and I said, you get me out of this class, or I'm quitting because I'm not ready to teach this. And so they got Nancy Moore, who had just come and
Right.
thing. I took her whatever class she had, probably algebra, and she took the calculus. And we didn't tell them. We just had one day they came down and switched our classes.
Wow.
And said, this is not my thing. Pre-calc was great, but calculus, I was too new, and I just said, it's wrong that I'm teaching this class. Get me out of this, and I want you to give it to her. And they, yeah,
Wow. That's really impressive. I've got to say, most teachers wouldn't have the courage to do that.
yeah. Well, I just knew that it was wrong for me to teach that because I wasn't ready to teach that class. And algebra was my bag, and trig was my bag, but calculus just wasn't.
Yeah.
And knew that it would be wrong to keep that class.
Wow. Wow. That's very impressive.
They
That's
didn't need to quit, so they switched it.
that's a pretty impressive thing to say to somebody too. You get me out of this or I'm out of here.
They had fired somebody, I think, and then he had that class and they just gave it to me. And I just thought,
Oh.
no, yeah.
Do you remember anybody you worked with that you thought, now that's somebody I really like working with? Was there another teacher or a principal?
Besides you,
Yes, besides me.
um, yeah, I think Nancy.
Oh, yeah.
And she came to me one day and she said, came a couple of times. She said, you and I are going to teach all the general math next year. It was time to do schedules. And I said, oh, good. She said, and you know this, the new teacher gets dumped on.
Yeah.
It's problems. And that's wrong because they're trying to learn how to be a teacher. So she said, you and I are going to take all the general math classes. I said, okay. I said, how many are there? She said, three. She said, how many do you want? I said, one. She said, fine, I'll take two. You'll take one. She said, we're tossing the book. We're going to write our own material and we're going to teach these kids. And actually, that was a really, really good year. I had some really neat kids. We taught them um, how to budget. We taught them how to write a check, which now people don't do that, but we taught them how to write a check and balance and spend their money. And it was a really rewarding experience. We'd plan it every week what we were going to do the next week.
Oh, that's awesome. That is
Yeah,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, because she's right that they were, uh, you give all the junk, we'll call it, the things that are hard to teach and kids don't want to be there, you give it to the new guy.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Well, that's what they did. I had in Deming, they called it Fundamentals of Math,
uh-huh.
FOM. Since they couldn't write all that out on the course description, it was FOM, and it was Fundamentals of Mathematics. The kids in that class called it Flunked Out of Math
Oh,
because you had to fail math to get into Fundamentals of Math.
oh,
And yeah, I had the same situation where I just had to come up with a curriculum because the book wasn't in any way kind of rational, it was just a book with a bunch of stuff in it.
yeah.
So yeah, I did that. I did balancing a checkbook, and I did public transit schedules. We looked at how things were planned and scheduled, and then I found this book on. I found two books. I found one called Math for Smarty Pants, and a book on where math came from, like math history and theories of counting and bases and sets and stuff like that, and in real simple sort of rudimentary systems. And so they were great. Once we got started, they did very well.
Yes, yes. You
So
can have to teach what they need.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There was a point where everybody has to take algebra. Well, I'm like, why?
yeah. Why? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, we have spoken for 30 minutes.
Oh,
So that wasn't too bad. That wasn't too painful, right?
great. Thank you.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing this. You
Oh,
know,
you're
I don't have a big channel, but this has all been about kind of trying to reconnect with what I wanted to do with John. And strangely enough, I think you and John are almost the same generation. Um, John, well, we won't go into the age, but I think you guys are the same generation. So I think you're a perfect fit for the channel. So I really appreciate you doing this.
that you asked.
So I will see you soon enough. I'll see you on Sunday. And
Okay.
I'm going to put this up. This will be on the channel on Saturday. And so when I put it up, I'll send you a link.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a
Okay.